High in the mountains where clouds touched stone, there lived a monk named Jinen. He hadn't spoken in over 20 years. New disciples were warned, ask him no questions, expect no answers. But they came anyway, because somehow his silence spoke. One morning a young man named Haru arrived at the monastery. His eyes were tired, his thoughts louder than his voice. He had read every book, followed every method, sought every teacher, but peace always slipped away. "My mind won't stop," he confessed to the head monk. "Then stay," was all he said. Haru was assigned to Jinin. Day 1, silence. Day 2, silence. On the third day, Haru asked, "What am I doing wrong?" Jinin stared at him, said nothing, and returned to sweeping leaves. Haru burned inside. Why won't he speak? But something in that silence held more weight than any lecture. And as the wind moved through the trees, Haru began to wonder. Was silence the lesson? Each morning Jinin rose with the sun. He swept the same stone path. He bowed to the same tree. He drank from the same stream. Haru followed closely, waiting for a moment, any moment, when the silence would break. It never did. Days passed. His thoughts only grew louder. "Why won't he speak to me?" Haru muttered. "Does he even notice I'm here?" One afternoon, overwhelmed, he stood in front of Jinen and said, "I've come for answers." Jinen simply blinked, turned, and continued stacking firewood. Haru's anger swelled. "What kind of teacher are you?" he snapped. Jinen paused, looked at him gently, then placed one log on top of another. Nothing more. That night, Haru sat alone, mind spinning. The silence was unbearable, too vast, too sharp. But within it, something strange stirred. He realized he wasn't just hearing silence. He was finally hearing himself. And that was the sound he'd been running from. The next day, something shifted. Haru still followed Jinin, but he stopped waiting for him to speak. Instead, he watched. How the monk walked with awareness, how he reacted to nothing and noticed everything. When a squirrel knocked over a water pot, Jinin smiled, picked it up, and continued as if nothing had happened. That afternoon, Haru sat beneath a tree, breathing to the rhythm of the wind. For the first time in years, his thoughts didn't scream. They whispered. Jinin sat beside him in silence. Minutes passed, then hours. No words, no teachings. And yet Haru felt like he had learned something. That peace doesn't arrive. It's uncovered, buried beneath noise. That evening he didn't ask any questions. He simply bowed before Jinin. And though the monk said nothing, Haru felt as though he had received an answer. If this story speaks to your restless mind, subscribe and ring the bell. Some truths are found in silence. From that day on, Haru stopped chasing answers. He woke before sunrise, mirrored Jinin's steps. He swept not to clean, but to move with purpose. He poured tea not to drink, but to feel the steam rise. One morning another disciple asked, "What has he taught you?" Haru paused. "Nothing I can explain. Everything I needed." The disciple looked confused. "That's not helpful." Haru nodded. "It's not supposed to help your thoughts. It's meant to help your presence." That night, Haru sat under the stars, listening, not to voices, but to the air itself. And he realized Jinin's silence wasn't absence. It was invitation to slow down, to stop solving, to be. For the first time, Haru didn't want to think his way out of silence. He wanted to stay in it, because in stillness he wasn't failing to understand. He was finally beginning to feel. And maybe that was the lesson Jinin had been offering all along. Jinin remained unchanged. He still walked slowly, watched leaves fall, bowed to trees, and spoke no words. But Haru had changed. The silence no longer felt like punishment. It felt like space. He began noticing his breath, the curve of his spine, the way thoughts floated when left untouched. One afternoon, Haru sat beside Jinin and whispered, "I used to think too much. I thought it meant something was wrong with me." Jinin said nothing. Instead, he handed Haru a smooth stone. No lesson, no explanation, just a stone. Haru held it, unsure what to do, but somehow he understood. Not everything needed meaning. Some things just needed presence. He closed his hand around it. The stone was cool, solid, real. And for once, Haru didn't analyze it. He didn't label it. He just let it be. And in doing so, he let himself be too. The mind didn't stop, but it no longer led. Silence had taken the front seat. Seasons shifted, snow melted, flowers returned. And Haru's once noisy mind became a garden he could sit within. Visitors continued to climb the mountain, seeking Jinin. Some expected miracles, others expected teachings. Most left puzzled. He said nothing, they'd complain. Haru listened, smiling softly. One guest finally turned to him and asked, "What has this silent monk actually taught you?" Haru paused. "That not all questions need answers. Some need stillness." The guest raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like avoiding the truth." Haru replied, "No, it's creating space for it to show itself." That evening, Haru sat by the pond near the temple, watching the surface ripple. A single leaf floated by. He didn't think about it. He didn't search for meaning. He just watched. And as he did, he realized the monk hadn't taught through silence. He had taught through presence. And Haru had finally learned to stay. Haru no longer felt like a student. He moved through the monastery with soft steps and clear breath. He still had thoughts, but they no longer owned him. They passed like clouds, and he let them. One crisp morning, Jinin gestured for Haru to follow, a rare moment of invitation. They walked without words for hours, through trees, over streams, until they reached a rock overlooking the valley. Jinin knelt, picked up a twig, and drew a circle in the dirt. Then he stood and walked away. Haru stared at the circle. No words, no meaning offered. And yet, he felt it. Everything begins and ends in stillness. Everything returns. That night, Haru returned to the circle. Wind had blown it away, and that, too, felt like part of the teaching. What comes will pass. What stays was never forced. He smiled into the dusk, knowing Jinin's silence had never been empty. It had always been full, with everything Haru hadn't known he needed. Years later, Jinin passed away quietly beneath a tree he had never named. No words, no farewell, just breath and then none. Haru found him seated, eyes closed, as if still meditating. He didn't cry. He simply bowed, honoring the silence that had once frustrated him and later saved him. In time, Haru became the monk others turned to, not because he spoke, but because when he did, it mattered. One morning, a new disciple asked, "What did Jinin teach you?" Haru stared at the mountains before answering, "That silence isn't emptiness, it's everything we ignore while chasing noise." The disciple frowned. "But how do you know when silence is the answer?" Haru smiled gently. "You don't. You just stop needing to ask." That night, Haru sat alone under the stars, the same way he had years ago, but different. And now, before this story ends, ask yourself, is your silence empty? Or is it just waiting to be heard?